This is the second in our series of lectures on economic growth and the business cycle, which is Module 6. The first one was on economic growth. In this one, we will focus on the business cycle and, in particular, unemployment. Now, you know what the business cycle is. The business cycle is defined simply as fluctuations in the level of economic activity. And over time, as history shows us, the economy both speeds up and slows down. Now, if we were to draw a line indicating what the economy does in the long run, as you can see, it goes up. Here's what it looks like in reality. But this is easier to look at because the fluctuations are enhanced and exaggerated. So it's easier to see what it is I'm talking about. Now, these short-term fluctuations can last as long as 10 years. Or, maybe as little as 3 months. The term business cycle is a misleading term. It simply means fluctuations in the level of economic activity. Now, the term cycle means systematically repetitive. It makes a pattern and then repeats that pattern, then repeats it again. But there is nothing cyclical in this sense, nothing repeating about the business cycle, other than the fact that it goes up and down. Now, this line, this yellow line here, represents economic growth, which we talked about in the previous lecture. Economic growth is defined as long-run increases in the potential GDP. Now, the potential GDP is the GDP that could be produced if all resources were productively employed. Now, you'll notice that there's an asterisk here by all. What is that asterisk doing there? What does it mean? We'll see that in just a few minutes. You'll notice here that there are some periods where the economy fails to live up to its potential. The yellow line represents its potential. The black line here represents the current or actual GDP. And you can see there are some cases where the current or actual GDP fails to live up to its potential. This, of course, is caused by a lack of spending. Spending is what causes the economy to go fast or go slow. Now, what is happening here is not all income that was earned in the previous period gets spent in the current period. That's going to leave some goods and services on the shelf. All the goods and services that were created are not being bought. This results in a buildup of inventories in the firms. Now, these gaps here that show periods of time when the economy fails to live up to its potential, they are called recessionary gaps. Now, technically speaking, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP. Now, that may or may not be the case here. It doesn't matter if there's an actual recession in the technical definition. What matters is that the economy is going slower than it needs to, or that it has the ability to go. Now, the problem that we have, the undesirable macroeconomic consequence that results from a recessionary gap, is called unemployment. Now, you will also notice that there are some periods of time where the economy exceeds its potential. What the heck is up with that? How can something exceed its potential? Isn't the potential the maximum it can do? How can it exceed its potential? How can an economy exceed its potential? Well, that's where this little asterisk comes in. When we define the potential GDP, we say that it is the GDP that could be produced if all resources were productively employed, but we don't really mean all in the strictest sense. Don't take the word all there literally. You'll see why. Now, these are called inflationary gaps. And that is because there's too much spending. The economy can't keep up with the spending. There's more spending than there are goods and services on the shelf. So what happens? Prices rise. The undesirable macroeconomic consequence of an inflationary gap is, wait for it, inflation. Now, the current real GDP does not always coincide with the potential GDP. As you can see, there are only a few moments in time where they actually coincide. Now, when they do not coincide, we get the undesirable macroeconomic consequences of inflation and unemployment. Now, in modules 9 and 10, what we will see is that the government can use some macroeconomic tools to smooth out the business cycle to avoid too much inflation and too much unemployment. We'll cover those in modules 9 and 10, but just so you'll know that these policies are called fiscal policy and monetary policy. Let's talk about unemployment. Unemployment exists when there are members of the workforce without jobs. Now, that may sound kind of obvious, but the key word here is workforce. To be a member of the workforce, you must be employed. If you're employed, you're automatically a member of the workforce. But even if you're not employed, if you are 16 years old or older, willing, able, and looking for work, willing, able, and actively seeking employment, then you are part of the workforce. The unemployment rate is computed as the number of members of the workforce without jobs divided by the total size of the workforce. That fraction is the unemployment rate. Now, if you're not in the workforce, you're not counted as being unemployed. So a housewife, if you will, who chooses to stay home, take care of the children, take care of the house, is not out actively seeking work, or a house husband, and does not have a job, is not counted as part of the unemployed because they're not in the workforce. But not all unemployment is due to fluctuations in the business cycle. There are other types of unemployment too, other reasons for the existence of unemployment. Let's consider those right now. The three types of unemployment categorized by their reason is frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment. Let's first look at frictional unemployment. Now, frictional unemployment is mismatch unemployment. Frictional unemployment exists when there are members of the workforce that are between jobs. Consider, at some point today, thousands of people were fired from their job. As of tonight, they do not have a job. Guess what? They are unemployed. But it wasn't due to a problem with the economy. People getting fired all the time. Today, thousands and thousands of people got fed up with their boss, told them, take this job and shove it, and marched in a huff out the front door. They quit. Well, tonight, guess what? They are unemployed, but not because there's something wrong with the economy. People quit all the time for a lot of different reasons. If they remain in the workforce, then they are unemployed. Also, when they go on strike, they are unemployed. Now, frictional unemployment tends to be short-term because presumably they're going to start tomorrow after they pout a little bit, start looking for work again. And it may or may not be a long time before they get it. Generally, it's not. Let's go back here to frictional unemployment. Now, why is it called frictional unemployment? It's called frictional unemployment because there is friction that prevents them after they are fired or after they quit from being rehired immediately. If the process was smooth, if there was no friction, then they'd be immediately rehired. I tried to snap my fingers just then and failed. Maybe you heard it, I don't know. What is this friction that keeps these people from being rehired immediately? It is a lack of knowledge, a lack of information. A lack of information. The worker does not know where the jobs are. The worker must go out and search. This may take some time. And the job openings do not know of the availability of the qualified workers. It's going to take some time for these two things to find each other. And that's what creates the friction. If you've ever looked for a job, you realize how long it takes to, locate a job, get an interview, take the interview, wait for the feedback. You get the feedback. They said, oh man, you nailed that interview. Can you come back for a second round of interviews? You say, well, I guess so. When will that be? How about in 3 weeks? Oh my gosh. Okay, so you go back for the second interview in 3 weeks, and you wait 2 weeks later, they said, you nailed that interview, you are our selectee. You say, oh great, when can I start? How about sometime in mid-April? Holy mackerel, you can see what friction prevents these people from being employed immediately after they quit or get fired. But eventually this friction is overcome and they work it out. And that's why frictional unemployment tends to be short-term unemployment. But it's important to realize that frictional unemployment exists not because there's something wrong with the economy. Now, here's another type of unemployment. And this unemployment also exists not because there's something wrong with the economy. This is called structural unemployment. Structural unemployment. Structural unemployment exists when there is a change in the structure of the economy. For instance, the structural unemployment tends to be longer term because oftentimes the unemployed person needs to retrain themselves in order to take advantage of some job. Now, the frictional, that wasn't necessarily the case, but with structural, they may have to go out and get some training. An example would be well, let's go back to this one. An example would be when a change in the demand for certain kinds of goods and services exist. Now, what would cause this? I don't know, maybe a change in consumer tastes and preferences or something like that. I know that the 9/11 attacks in September of 2001 reduced the demand for air travel. Thousands of members of the workforce specializing in air travel, pilots, and all of those other guys, they got laid off because of a change in the demand. What did the pandemic do to the change in demand for goods and services? Some firms got wiped out. This is not because there's something wrong with the economy. There's something from the outside happening that is changing the demand for certain kinds of goods and services. Structural unemployment, a change in the structure of an economy. Here's another one, technology, a change in technology. Now, we like technological progress. Technological progress is good. Technological progress produces goods and services that are better and cheaper and increases our standard of living and quality of life. But does technological progress destroy jobs? The answer is yes. In 1799, a young textile apprentice named Ned Ludd destroyed a textile weaving machine. He got mad and just went berserk and destroyed that darn thing, fearing that his years of hard work learning his craft would be wasted now because of automation. And by 1811, the practice became widespread throughout England. Look at these people, destroying these machines here. The mobs that attacked, burned, and destroyed the factories were called the Luddites in commemoration of Ned. And ultimately, their rioting and destruction were eventually put down by the English authorities. Today, a person with that archaic fear of suspicion of technology is known as a Luddite. Are you a Luddite? The thing is, though, that technological progress also creates jobs. It destroys jobs and it creates jobs. And in general, interestingly enough, it creates more jobs than it destroys. Technology, it destroys jobs, but it tends to create more jobs than it destroys. And there are two ways in which technological change increases jobs, creates jobs. One way is the direct way, and the other way we'll call the indirect way. So let's look and see how technological change creates jobs in the direct way. Well, for one thing, technological change produces jobs for which there was no need prior to the technological change. The industrial robots have destroyed assembly line jobs. See all these guys right here? None of them are employed there anymore. Oh, they're probably all dead. But anyway, even if they were alive, they wouldn't be employed because these guys right here are taking over. But look, this technological change has increased the demand and created jobs for robot designers. Not just robot designers, but they've also created jobs for people who transport the robots, maintain the robots, repair, operate, market, merchandise, advertise, install, and sell the robots. None of those jobs were there prior to the industrial robot. Now look at all the jobs that are there. Self-driving cars will destroy the jobs of taxi cab drivers. Those taxi cab drivers, they're not going to have a job when the taxi company hires or uses self-driving cars, but it will create jobs for engineers and designers of self-driving cars. And in addition, of course, to a whole lot of other jobs. None of those jobs were there before the self-driving cars. The personal computer destroyed a lot of jobs. It destroyed the jobs of typewriter repairmen. It destroyed the jobs of middle management. but because the purpose of middle management is to process and pass information. And this is exactly what the personal computer does. So a whole lot of middle managers got canned, and the firm started using personal computers, but somebody had to program these things. Somebody had to write the software for them, etc. Those jobs didn't exist before the personal computer. Now, here's a question. Does technological change create more jobs in the direct way than it destroys? Think about that for a second. Does it create more jobs in the direct way than it destroys? Or does it destroy more jobs than it creates in the direct way? What do you think? Turns out it destroys more jobs than it creates in the direct way. Now, there's no statistics on this. This might be a good PhD dissertation for you when you major in economics. But consider the logic. No profit maximizing firm would implement a technological change that created more work than it saved. Hey, we're going to employ this technological change here, and we're going to need 10 additional workers. That ain't going to happen. That's not what technological change does. Most technological change is labor saving. It takes the place of labor. It does not increase the demand for labor. So where then do all the new jobs come from? Obviously, they come from the indirect way. The indirect way. What is the indirect way? Technological progress makes firms more profitable because it improves the economy and or the efficiency of the production process. Now, we know what economy and efficiency is. We've gone over this several times, but the idea is that it increases the economy or the efficiency, the firm is going to become more profitable. I mean, ultimately, that's the reason for employing the technological change. When this happens, the supply curve for the good they are producing will shift to the right. And if the supply curve shifts to the right, this will cause the price of the product to go down. You can confirm this for yourself by jotting down some supply and demand curves on the back of an envelope and seeing if what I'm saying is not the case. Shift that supply curve to the right, see what happens to price, and see what happens to output. Now, when the price goes down, this will cause the real income, the purchasing power of consumers, the real income, which is the purchasing power for the consumers of that product, to go up. They're not spending as much on that product. They have more money to spend on other things. Now that the consumers have higher real incomes, they have more purchasing power, the demand curve for other goods and services shifts to the right. Now, what are these other goods and services? I have no idea. It could be anything from new cars to getting fingernails glued on in a nail salon, or anything in between. Who knows? But what's going to happen is that the demand for other goods and services are going to go up when the consumer's real incomes go up. And the consumer's real incomes go up because the price of the product they were consuming has gone down. Now, as producers respond to the higher demand for products, more output is produced. Check out your supply and demand analysis you jotted down on the back of the envelope. Not only does the price of the product go down, but the output went up. Now, to produce that additional output, they're going to need more workers. And when you shift the demand curve for all them other goods and services to the right, the output is going to go up there too, and they're going to need more workers in those industries as well. So you can see that the demand for workers increases. But look, as you can see, there is a number of steps between the implementation of the technology, which is this blue box, and the creation of jobs, which is this pink box. You have to go through all of these steps right here. Now, that's going to take some time, and that's why the structural unemployment takes a little bit longer. Plus, people are going to have to learn how to operate the equipment, write the software, create the the blueprints for the industrial robot stuff like that, they're going to need training. And even if it's just gluing on fingernails, they're going to have to learn how to do that too. But history has shown that the indirect way takes some time, as is obvious. And it creates jobs for which there must be additional training by members of the workforce. So it's not immediate. But on the whole, the jobs that it does create are better paying jobs, because the jobs doing physical labor, they're gone. Now you're going to require some skills, and the skilled jobs, the jobs that require skills, pay more. And ultimately, when you consider both the jobs created in the direct and indirect way, it's going to create more jobs than it destroys. Now, a final change in the economy would be when an American company moves to another country. Take a picture frame manufacturer in North Carolina, for example, producing picture frames made out of wood. They might move to Mexico. Why? Well, there's going to be cheaper labor in Mexico. It may be also cheaper resources. The wood may be cheaper. There may be a better access to the resources or whatever it is. The rent on the factory may be lower. But when they move to another country, isn't this going to destroy jobs? The answer is yes. Why do we outlaw this if it's going to destroy jobs? Well, hypothetically, look at this gold box here. Hypothetically, it makes goods cheaper for Americans, increasing their real income. Does this sound familiar? Thus increasing the demand for goods and services, and thus creating jobs. Let me go back to the slide for just a second. This is a reason why we like free trade. In free trade, although some foreign country is going to produce things that could be produced by Americans, free trade permits Americans to specialize in what they do best and what they call their comparative advantage. It means that resources are allocated more efficiently, and both parties to a trade, therefore, will win. Why? Because resources are allocated more efficiently and because of the benefits of specialization. NAFTA is a free trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. North American Free Trade Agreement. What this did is drop the barriers to free trade between these three countries. There were regulations, there were tariffs, there were quotas, there were all kinds of things. NAFTA was an agreement that was signed by Bill Clinton that would drop this and make free trade easier. Now, the ultimate purpose, of course, was to make goods and services cheaper for Americans by reducing the cost of production of, picture frame companies who moved to Mexico. That was the purpose. And we go through the same process as the change in technology. Yeah, it destroys jobs. It destroyed all those picture frame jobs in North Carolina, but it's going to create a whole lot of other jobs too, as the real incomes of Americans go up. Now, before we go to that side, let me just say one more thing. There's been no evidence that NAFTA actually did increase jobs. There's conflicting evidence, I would say. There's no conclusive determination as to whether NAFTA increased or decreased the number of jobs. And that's because there are so many variables affecting the economy at any one time. The outcome of the model is based upon how you construct it. What variables do you include? What variables do you assume away? And based upon that, you're going to get different outcomes. So there's no real way to tell. But here's the logic. Now, in any large, dynamic, geographically dispersed, technologically progressive, heterogeneous, and constantly changing the economy, these two types of unemployment, frictional and structural, are largely unavoidable. Because they are unavoidable, they are acceptable. And we will call them natural unemployment. It's just natural that they exist. Natural unemployment. And currently, the natural unemployment rate is somewhere between 4 and 5% of the workforce. Now, the economy is very, very strong now. So for our purposes, if you're asked this question on a test or something like that, let's just assume that the current natural unemployment rate is 4%. 4%. That will be the official natural unemployment rate for the rest of this course, 4%. And therefore, full employment would exist when there is only 96% of the workforce employed. That 4% is natural, and therefore we accept it. Full employment exists when there is a 4% unemployment rate, because that 4% unemployment rate is going to be due to natural unemployment. And that's why we have that little asterisk there by all. We don't really mean 100%. What we mean is 96%. Because the potential GDP is building in this natural rate of unemployment. When we compute what the economy could produce, we build in that 4% natural unemployment rate. So, this is why it is possible for the actual GDP to exceed the potential GDP. If the unemployment rate drops below 4%, then the actual GDP is going to be greater than the potential GDP. Let me repeat that. If the actual unemployment rate falls below 4%, then the actual GDP will exceed the potential GDP, because the potential GDP assumes an unemployment rate of 4%. Now, this type of unemployment is unacceptable. This is cyclical unemployment. And cyclical unemployment is due to problems with the economy. It's due to a contraction in the business cycle. A contraction in the business cycle. That's when the business cycle is going down. An expansion is when the business cycle is going up. A contraction is when the business cycle is going down. And therefore, we call it cyclical unemployment because it relates to fluctuations in the business cycle. Cyclical unemployment exists when there are more people in the workforce than there are jobs available. Not enough jobs because there's not enough spending. Full employment exists when cyclical unemployment is 0. Full employment exists when the unemployment rate is 4%. Full employment exists when cyclical unemployment is 0. Make sure you understand that distinction there. Now, hypothetically, the federal government can use fiscal and monetary policy to adjust the level of total spending in order to speed the economy up when it starts going too slowly, in order to avoid too much unemployment. Now, don't wait too long until watching the third session in this series on economic growth and the business cycle. The third session will be on the business cycle and inflation.